Hello, this is Jeffrey Harris back for the 411 Wrestling Interviews podcast. Today's date is Tuesday, April 16th. Excuse me a little bit. So a little bit something different today. We've been seeing quite a bit of news on what is next for the new wrestling promotion, All Elite Wrestling. And news recently broke about the future of All Elite Wrestling and where it could be heading in terms of TV and how this could really rock the TV wrestling landscape in the coming year or so. So I'm speaking with Tony Maglio. He's a writer for The Wrap. Tony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me on.
All right, appreciate it. So you wrote the article, Turner in Advanced Talks with All Elite Wrestling for Weekly Show, and it looks like Turner is in talks with All Elite Wrestling, also known as AEW, that would have basically bring a weekly wrestling TV show back to Turner Networks or TNT, which we have not seen since 2001, almost 20 years. So you wrote the article, and it appears this announcement might be made as early as May at the upfronts. This is when TV networks sort of announced their new and upcoming shows for the following season. So, how close do you think this deal is to getting made?
Well, we use the word advanced talks, which can mean anything from, beyond preliminary to imminent. I would say somewhere, if we were looking at this on like a graph, we're probably a little closer to imminent than anything else. Some people believe that there's no doubt whatsoever that it'll be announced before the upfronts. I don't know that that's necessarily true. All I know is it would make way more sense for all of the parties involved, especially Turner, that it would be announced by the upfronts, which for people who don't know take place annually in New York. They're ongoing, but Turner's turn isn't until maybe like May 10th or 12th or something along those lines. So if it's coming together, it's got a little less than a month to really come together here, and I suspect it will. Now, by comparison, I know you're plugged in very well source-wise with WWE. I recall last year, WWE in the NBC Universal upfronts, they announced that they renewed Raw, and I think around that time we also heard about the Fox Smackdown deal, correct? Or am I mistaken? Yeah, that would make sense. That would stand to reason. It's funny, I broke the Fox Smackdown news, and I don't exactly remember when I did that. But it would make sense because, yes, of course, if USA was keeping Smackdown as well, that would be something that they'd want to highlight to the advertisers, which is one thing they certainly will do at the NBCU upfront this year, and Fox will absolutely do at its Fox upfront this year now with Smackdown on Friday.
I definitely remember Ronda Rousey was at the NBCU upfront, and I think that was when USA announced that they were keeping Raw on, but I believe that was around the time they announced the move for Smackdown. So this is pretty insane. Do you think TNT, TBS, the Turner family of networks, do you think they're in a place right now where they would be okay with having wrestling back on, professional wrestling?
I think so. It's funny that you mentioned the 20 years. I haven't actually thought about it being that long, but of course it is damn near that long. But yeah, I mean, look, live sports, live TV is the most valuable property TV channels can have. And if, these bundles that we talk about, which basically means your cable package, Turner has a couple of channels and they have to continue to justify you paying for their couple of channels. And, Raw and Smackdown on USA are two of the top-rated shows every single week. Smackdown will be very big when it moves to a broadcast network, which is higher rated than cable next year, although it is moving from Tuesday to Friday, which is lower viewing levels. But to compete, yeah, you need, Turner has the NBA. They have some baseball, obviously. They know how important, how valuable live sports are. And since they're not getting Smackdown and they're not getting the UFC, finding the next best thing considering USA Network is TNT's number one competitor, and we're talking about this probably going to TNT, makes not only all the sense in the world, it's probably pretty necessary to continue to compete going forward.
Now, just from my standpoint, being a fan who's watched a multitude of wrestling products for years, having watched the Monday Night Wars unfold across TNT, TBS, USA, and what have you, do you think the people, the brain trust who are in charge of TNT right now, do you think they have the proper mindset and wherewithal to work with a wrestling product? Because I think fans would be concerned with TNT because of the way things ended with WCW, where they couldn't get rid of wrestling fast enough. And, that was a long time ago, and I'm sure it's not the same people there anymore. But what do you think?
Well, we've all heard stories. Eric Bischoff specifically has talked a lot about Ted Turner stories. Ted Turner's not doing anything now. He's not a part of it. Put it this way, there's no decision coming out from Ted Turner. So you eliminate the Ted Turner aspect of this. And there is some fresh blood there. There is, some hipper programming executives, I think, at the Turner channels. And they're obviously got, massive amounts of money at their disposal, thanks to AT&T being their new parent company. I think you should always be. I think wrestling fans, I'm a wrestling fan. We're a very specific people. And I think we should always be a little concerned when giant corporations get involved, especially when we're talking about AEW. The reason why everybody's excited about AEW is it's not a giant corporation. It's an independent startup by, some hip, cool, young, independent, whether they like that word or not, wrestlers. So, yeah, sure, let's be concerned, but let's also be realistic. The reason ECW failed is because, Paul Heyman has said this a lot of times, it didn't have distribution. You need distribution, and distribution means television. So, look, I'm not a big TNT fan. I don't really watch their dramas or anything like that, but TNT is a massive platform owned by an even more massive company, and they have the ability to deliver to everyone from where I am in New Jersey to you on the West Coast. They have, the platform to deliver a weekly wrestling show. So be nervous, okay, but be glad that you have the option, to get it. And right now it's not you don't have to pay for a streaming service, which who knows what might happen in the future of the WWE network. Anyway, all that said, which is a very long run up to this, yeah, I know TNT and Turner has a history with wrestling, some good and some bad, but there aren't that many platforms that have the money and the distribution that can bring us, all elite wrestling, which we've seen very little of. So let's see how it plays out.
It's just, when I first heard about All Elite Wrestling and what they're doing, I think having a TV distribution plan like this would make it a lot more real to me, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Now, based on what you've researched and heard, where do you think this is going to fall in terms of, will it be a weekly live 2-hour show, or do you think it'll be taped? What are you hearing?
I have to imagine it will be live. The hours make sense. I don't think anyone's doing 3 hours other than Raw. I don't know if a 1-hour show to start makes more sense for AEW from content. From a content standpoint, they have some people who are used to writing wrestling TV. But, look, they got to pay. They're going to have to pay for their airtime. So, and they're unproven, as excited as people are. They have cool T-shirts and a cool roster and, whatever, but they're unproven. Let's be realistic. So that's why when we say weekly, look, you kind of need weekly because you kind of need continuity and storylines and a regular time slot. Now, people I've spoken to have said to me, yeah, we want it weekly, but that doesn't mean 52 weeks a year. And, even people on the network side have said that to me, which is, probably and possibly a good thing for AEW from a mission standpoint in terms of, not beating the hell out of their talent and, the wear and tear that one's body takes for 52 weeks of TV wrestling. But that said, an off-season makes people forget, and an off-season allows your competition to get a leg up on you. So should it be weekly? Yes, of course it should be weekly. I think it should be every week. I don't know if they're ready to be every week. So, I believe AEW has said they're not going to do live shows that are untelevised, assuming they get a television deal, aside from their pay-per-views. So maybe that's the way that they'll keep the wear and tear down on their talents' bodies and on their talents, appearances. But we'll see. I think an off-season sounds great. I think it's unrealistic.
You're doing a good job here, because now you're getting ahead of me and almost answering my next questions I'm going to ask you. But you kind of addressed it a little bit. So you mentioned a little bit of an off-season. In your article, you said it is possible that the AEW series would not be year-round. That would likely be a combination of the newness of the league and its desire to be more wrestler-friendly than rival WWE, which has a punishing schedule for talent. Now, I cannot agree with you more on that, because I think when you look at talents that are getting injured now, I think the WWE roster, in my opinion, is way overworked. And you have two shows. You have Raw and SmackDown, and you do have NXT and 205 Live. But Raw and SmackDown, they're both running house show tours like concurrent with each other. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that, I mean, it's no wonder guys are getting hurt so much and having to sit on the shelf or having their careers shortened. So what do you, or I guess, what makes you believe that this could be a factor for AEW?
Well, look, I mean, Cody and the Young Bucks are wrestlers, right? I mean, right. Even Brandy is, I guess, a wrestler, or at least has the experience as one. They are, the whole purpose behind AEW in the beginning seems to be, we want to treat wrestlers better. We want to be more wrestler friendly. We don't want to be a big corporation, although of course they are bankrolled by billionaires. But look, they are the faces of the company. They are legitimate executives in the company. Cody and the Bucks. This is so they get it. Anytime someone is running the show, a player is running the team, it's going to be much more player friendly. Anytime a coach is running the team, and that coach also happens to be a chairman and a billionaire, it's going to be more shareholder friendly. AEW is not publicly traded. They only have to answer to the cons currently, and then whoever has their TV deal. So it strikes me that one of the main motivations behind forming AEW is to just make the boys, and the girls happy. Of course, it's a business, and they will realize that soon if they haven't realized it enough. One way to not make the boys happy is not have them on the road 350 days a year. Not to tack on live shows on top of TV shows. It's funny that what you say about the WWE roster, which I agree with you. I think they're too beat up, and I think they're overworked. But at the very same time, my opinion of the WWE roster is it's also too large. So it's this weird combination. So WWE as a publicly traded company has shareholders to answer to, right?
Right.
And the only thing they care about, which means the only thing the board of directors at WWE cares about, is their fiduciary duties to shareholders, meaning we have to make the most money possible for our stockholders. And so in doing that, what they have to do, especially as TV ratings decline, although of course we see they are making humongous amounts of money in TV contracts, they have to sell live shows, they have to sell merch, and they have to sell merch at those live shows. So they kind of have no choice, unless they're willing to make the company smaller, than to put on as many shows as humanly possible and earn as much revenue as humanly possible. AEW wants to buck that, and they can buck that because they don't have stockholders. One day they may become, if they actually become as successful as many fans hope and as AEW probably hopes, things will have to change, and it may become more of a business than it currently is in its infancy stages. But, because of that, I think AEW does have the option to not do live shows other than TV and to possibly even have an off season. I don't think personally that it's realistic if they ever actually want to compete with WWE. but we're nowhere near there yet.
Now, I think those are good points, but Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer did state in response to your report here that the idea that they might not be year-round or could have an off-season is not accurate. Do you have a response to that?
Well, look, Dave's the best at what he does. I'm not going to say anything bad about Dave. He's very well sourced, and he may very well be right. I can only really report what my sources tell me. And again, nothing is signed. There is no signed deal here, so anything could change. I think Dave's response to this makes more sense if this sounds right than my reporting, because as I've been saying on this podcast, in this interview, as a former businessman myself, I don't think an off-season works. I don't think you can actually compete with WWE and have an off-season. So I can only report what my sources tell me. Right now they say it's possible because those are things that are being discussed. But I don't think it makes sense for Turner, and I don't think it makes sense for AEW as a business to have an off-season. But is it possible? Yeah, they say it's possible.
Well, do you know Jonathan Solomon in his podcast? He made a good.
I don't.
He made a good point on this topic where if you're a network and you want a live, wrestling product, you want a product that can give you live new content 52 weeks a year, ideally, right? And that's the attraction that, say, Fox has with SmackDown Live, is with a wrestling product. Generally, it's 365 days a year. It's new content every week. Game of Thrones, one of the hottest shows on TV. You can't get that with Game of Thrones, right?
Right.
It's a little more limited. So, I guess that's the perspective where I guess I see where you're saying from a business standpoint, you want to have a weekly show every week, 52 weeks out of the year, correct?
Well, you have to. I mean, look, sports is different than Game of Thrones, than entertainment. Right. Sports entertainment is different than sports. I mean, football can have an off-season, and football is so punishing that, of course, it needs an off-season. Even basketball, it's so punishing. Of course, it needs an off-season. While, wrestling is incredibly physical, and especially the travel can hurt they can wear on their bodies so much, much of it is planned out, much of it is scripted. It is kind of a controlled chaos that you don't get in other sports, right? And also, writers in a room can kind of determine how much an individual is being used or not. But of course, we've also discussed injuries, and lots of injuries happen. So yes, you need a large enough roster to do 52 weeks a year. But I don't mean that necessarily like that the television network needs 52 weeks a year. That I don't necessarily believe. They want it, of course, because it's guaranteed live viewing and it's almost guaranteed ratings. Look at Raw and SmackDown. We talk about their ratings being down. They still beat the hell out of everything not called The Walking Dead on cable, and they're right up there with a heck of a lot of broadcast TV shows, too, in terms of Nielsen ratings. But what ends up happening is, if you have a storyline product like WWE is, like WCW was, you need that continuity, or else people forget. People will, if WCW, for example, had an off season midway through the Monday Night Wars, guess who would have been the clear victor? It would have been WWE, right? It wouldn't have even been a war. It would have just been a temporary situation. So networks are used to having seasons. The traditional TV season is still September to May. We have original programming in the summer, but Game of Thrones is only 7 weeks or something this year. So they're used to having much less than 52 weeks of consistent programming. But the league itself, for the sake of fans, I personally believe, and it sounds like Meltzer believes and other people believe, they do need that full 52 weeks. They need to not go away.
Now, I'm a little bit curious. Is there ever any concern that when there's an article like this, could it jinx the deal and possibly cause the deal to fall apart?
On my end, I don't really care because as a reporter, I just have to report the news. On the ends of AEW and Turner, they could do one of two things, right? They could either use myself or Meltzer or any of these other reporters as a bargaining tool, which I'm not foolish enough to believe does not happen, or they could look at it as it could be problematic and could make the deal fall apart. You never know which way shining a light on something could go. It also could theoretically have no impact whatsoever. It could be a virtually done, virtually imminent deal that I'm just writing about on the website that employs me, right? So for me, like I said, the wrestling fan in me, I want AEW to have a weekly show. The reporter in me, I never want to screw anybody, out of a job. I never want to hurt anybody's chances of getting a nice big fat contract, but it's my job. So we'll see how it shakes out. But in this case, in this specific case, I don't think there's anything particularly damning in the reports that either I've written or I've seen that should impact anything one way or the other. It just might raise more awareness and maybe make more money. I don't know. Not for me, but for somebody else.
Now, that's the other thing. Is it a way of... Do you see these things, this information getting out as a way to raise awareness from their end?
I mean, look, not to keep bringing up Meltzer, but since you brought him up, like, what they do, or like, Ryan Satin, who I just met at WrestleMania, who I like, what a lot of other wrestling reporters that do a very nice job of, a lot of them write for blogs and, the term dirt sheets, which I guess some people use in a poor way. I don't. These guys do wonderful jobs. They do an amazing job. I'm a reporter I run the TV side of a Hollywood trade magazine. So I have a lot more of a need to kind of go by the rules of just general journalism. In other words, I can't report rumors and backstage stuff, unless I kind of have it really nailed down and really well sourced and that sort of thing. So what I'm saying is some of these wrestling blogs have a much better, they have a much easier time or a much better chance to get some of the, the TikTok-y stuff out there than I do. So in terms of bringing attention to them, I guess what I bring to the table is maybe a different reader. My reader is, while the internet and Twitter and everything has changed everything, my reader is technically supposed to be like someone who is interested in the business of Hollywood. And in my specific case, their interest lies in the business of television. So what I'm possibly bringing awareness to is to that side, not necessarily the wrestling fan. So all that said, I'm not saying one is better or worse. It just it might not be a humongous audience for this. I have no idea, frankly, for this particular article. But it may be a different kind of audience member that hasn't been exposed to a lot of the wrestling Twitter that you and I love so much.
Now, I think it's very exciting because when I see a story like this on The Wrap, which you don't really often see, I think what's exciting is when I see a story like in a Hollywood trade like this, mm-hmm. It makes me think there's definitely something there. Something is definitely going on. Generally, I hear rumors all the time on clickbait websites or whatever, or just random Twitter people. But when I see it on, let's say, The Wrap, or I see it on Deadline, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, etc., I think so negotiations are happening, contracts are being written, it's definitely in that stage. So that's why I got so excited when I saw your report.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I don't mean to make it sound as if my audience is more savvy than, like you mentioned, the blogs or whatever. Those guys, I mean, look, you talk Meltzer, you talk Slice Wrestling is one of the best sourced people that that works in the business. And I love those guys. I read them regularly. I'm, friends with Slice, for example. But it is a different, we have different kinds of sources because we serve a different kind of industry. Believe me, I get frustrated when, those guys, or Wrestling Sheet or whatever, when they scoop me on storyline or contracts or this and that. as a fan, I get geeked out about that stuff. I get very excited about that stuff. It's just kind of not my job so much to write about that, because my sources are, look, I know the AEW people, but let's also be frank. Like, I'm a TV reporter. You could often probably draw a line between maybe which side I might be better sourced on when a TV network might be involved.
Now, this whole Bleacher Report Live thing, is this a real serious, I guess, platform for Turner Broadcasting to make Bleacher Report into like a streaming content destination?
It's a great question. I really don't know the answer, because they put a very big spotlight on Bleacher Report Live for the Tiger Woods Phil Mickelson pay-per-view. Unfortunately, they kind of blew that a little bit, at least the money-making part of it. So it sounds to me like they are very invested in the tech and making it work and making it a destination. But they're probably not quite there yet in terms of its, user compatibility and everything. But that said, it's 2019, and you need to have multiple platforms for all of your very pricey sports rights. Now, I don't know that AEW will be. It's not going to be a deal like WWE or UFC, but you got to supplement with these kinds of streaming platforms. Who knows what it'll eventually turn into? But, even WWE played around with Facebook Watch with its Mixed Match Challenge, and that's what everybody's doing. They're trying to kind of figure out where they can play other than on TV.
I agree with that. In 2019, you need to have some sort of streaming content. You need to have some sort of streaming channel. I just don't know about Bleacher Report Live, Yeah.
It's a known, Bleacher Report is a known destination for sports, and that's a starting point, I suppose. But even WWE Network, which I think does a pretty good job, they haven't really utilized WWE Network as much as I would have predicted a few years ago they would have by now. So I don't necessarily think anything that can exist on cable TV, like an All Elite Wrestling weekly show, I don't suspect that's going to migrate to a Bleacher Report Live, at least not anytime soon. But I think everybody's just kind of setting themselves up for the future, because who the hell knows?
I just think if you want streaming, I think you need to rebrand Bleacher Report into something else. Like, nothing against Bleacher Report, and I know it is a Turner property. I just think it's not what I think I want to use when I want to, I guess, do streaming sports. I mean, with ESPN and ESPN Plus, it's a different matter altogether.
Right.
And when I heard what you said about the Tiger Woods thing, it's just, I don't know. It's when I hear Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, like, I'm like, okay, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But Bleacher Report Live, I'm just like, all right. Look, branding is important, right? Right, Tony? I mean, it's a big deal, and I'm just not sure if Bleacher Report Live is the right brand for how they want to have their streaming content. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I mean, the other thing to talk about is, Turner is part of Warner Media now, and Warner Media is setting up its own, Disney Plus-esque streaming platform. And we do not know what the future of that will look like. I believe that would be a much better destination for, rights that are anything more than what you and I would talk about as like spillover, like nice little supportive shows or whatever. But, if let's say AEW was ever going to go streaming and Turner owned it, we might probably be talking about the Warner Media streaming platform over Bleacher Report Live, but that hasn't launched yet. And I think right now we're all still kind of figuring it out. I mean, Disney Plus just had its, just debuted, not that it launched, but it debuted its platform the other day, and they own the vast majority at this point of Hulu. They own, ESPN Plus, obviously. So I personally think everyone is just kind of setting themselves up for the future, because no one really knows what that's going to look like. No one really knows if TV is going to become, if you like HBO and Netflix and this and that, that's all you get. If cord cutting is going to continue and where it ends, No one has any idea. We know streaming is only growing. So right now it sounds like they're probably just keeping all possibilities open.
Now, just to kind of go over to the WWE thing a little bit,
Sure.
right before WrestleMania weekend, John Oliver had that sort of scathing piece about WWE and how the workers are treated, being classified as independent contractors, when really when they don't get health care, they have to pay for all their own travel expenses other than airfare. Has that period sort of did WWE manage that okay, and has that basically blown over for them at this point? Because it kind of seems that way to me.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I think WWE handled it well by releasing a statement, inviting him, and then Triple H was on Fox Sports 1, and he didn't talk about Oliver, I don't believe, but he opened with how the wellness policy has been updated and changed, and so on and so forth. And look, the other part of 2019 is that we move on pretty quickly from like big, enormous stories that we all latch on to. So that was a story for a couple of days of WrestleMania week. I tried finding out if Oliver was going to take them up on their offer. I'm guessing either he didn't, or if he did, it's being hidden for some sort of future content, future programming. But it sounds like he probably did not. So yeah, I think WWE handled that about as well as they can, because look, do I want all of my favorite wrestlers to be taken care of better? Yeah, of course I do. But all of these things come with a cost, and not to take like the evil Mr. McMahon side of things. The history of the independent contractor is such a instilled tradition in wrestling, and they're not making what I make. The top guys are making millions of dollars. So does it suck that they have to pay for their own insurance and set up their own retirement account? Yes, of course it does. But they know what they're getting into when they sign these contracts. So as long as the contracts reflect the cost of taking care of your health and your family and whatever it is, then I think that's okay. So I understand what Oliver did. I think he did a great job of it. I think we would all appreciate, maybe even a few more improvements to WWE's wellness policy. But I also, the seriousness with which they took Daniel Bryan's injury, for example. I talked to him a few times. He was incredibly frustrated that they would not take a risk and let him wrestle.
He was out of the ring for 3 years.
Yeah, so I think Oliver did not give, and I think John Oliver is amazing, but I don't think he gave WWE's wellness policy enough credit for coming a long way on a lot of things. And the second part of that that's worth mentioning is I believe somebody asked AEW, hey, this John Oliver thing really makes some good points. Are you going to have your wrestlers be employees? And that was an opportunity for them to say, yes, this is how wrestler-friendly we are, that everyone who works here gets health benefits, gets retirement benefits.
Okay. So you're hearing everyone is getting health benefits.
No. Oh. What I'm saying is I believe they were asked about that, and my understanding, I didn't do reporting on this myself, but my understanding is that they kind of walked away from that opportunity, and they're basically those wrestlers who are executives, like the top guys, like probably even up down to Kenny Omega, will be employees and will get health benefits.
Well, something tells me even AEW is not going to want to take the opposite side of this, and they would stick with the independent contractor model. Not for like the Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks, but for the other talent they'll have contracted.
Look, I work for a small company. It's a very expensive undertaking. You want to plant your flag in the ground and be the wrestler-friendly promotion. That'd be wonderful, and I would applaud the heck out of them if they did. But it's a business. They don't even have a TV contract yet. They've done one pay-per-view. It's a very expensive, and they have a growing roster. It would be not cheap to cover these guys. Right. These guys they work in a dangerous profession. It'd be quite a bit. Fuck that.
Well, here's my whole perspective on this, and I think the Oliver story made a lot of great points, but I feel the same way about UFC and MMA fighters. If they want these changes and if they feel they are owed these changes, they have to make it happen for themselves. WWE is not going to do it for them. Technically, they have no obligation to do it for them. They have to do it.
Right.
And the fans cannot do it. Look, I'm a huge wrestling fan, and I want these guys I want them to live long, comfortable lives, and I want them to have health insurance, preferably paid for by the WWE. But I disagree with John Oliver that the fans have to cheer or make noise to make that happen. The wrestlers have to do that, and it has to happen at the highest levels. It has to happen from John Cena, Roman Reigns on down. It can't be, and it has to be unified if they want those changes. If they were to want a wrestling union, they have to unionize. They can't expect WWE is not going to create a union for them. They would have to do it themselves.
I agree with you. And who's the last guy that really tried publicly? Well, I think it was Jesse Ventura, and I believe the story goes that Hulk Hogan maybe dimed him out on that.
Right.
You're right.
But apparently, I don't know if this is true, but apparently after that happened, after he found out he was ratted out, Jesse Ventura's, I'm not gonna even talk about this again, because if these guys aren't going to stand up for themselves and try to get a union, they don't deserve it, basically.
Well, it's tricky. You talk about John Cena and Roman Reigns, and I do agree with you completely. It would have to be pretty much those guys. Those guys are making so much money that they're fine. They don't need health insurance paid for by their employer. Would they prefer it? Of course they would prefer it. Everyone would. But, the ones you got to worry about are, I don't know, Heath Slater or whoever doesn't appear on TV, right? I mean, I think of him because of the I Got Kids, but it's true. Mm-hmm. So, there is that, but these guys are so, at some point, yes, people become jaded, everything becomes a job. But they're also still so lucky to be there, and they know that, and they are, for the most part, replaceable. And unfortunately, you make enough noise, maybe what happens, in the past with like a Jesse Ventura happens again. But yes, I do agree with you. I do believe it would have to be the top guys putting their foot down, and I think Triple H would probably.
But more than anything, they would have them, the UFC fighters, who feel they're not getting a fair shake. They have to do it. Mm-hmm. It can't be the fans making noise. The fighters, the wrestlers, they have to do it and make it happen. They have to make it happen for themselves. If that's what they want, ultimately. I don't know. But that's just my opinion on it. I don't know. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but to me, in my opinion, that's what it would take for there to be a change.
I agree, and you'll notice if you watch back. I noticed this when I watched that first. Oliver is really, really, really good at calls to action at the end of his lengthy clips.
Right.
He did call for action, but it was very subdued, even for him. He did not recommend specific chants. He did not recommend specific signages. I don't remember the exact wording, but even he said something like, maybe you want to not do this, or maybe like. He was a little bit cagey about it, almost like he knew the, air quotes, WWE universe was not going to roll this way, and so he didn't want to set himself up to not look like he had influence. So I think I do think he's a fan, and I think he was kind of hedging himself, because I think he's probably smart enough to know that that's not really what it'll take. What it'll take is Triple H succeeding Vince McMahon and some of Triple H's still active buddies being like, hey, come on, buddy, we really need
I think the one thing WWE could have done a little differently is, they said they had a point-by-point response to him. I would have liked to have seen what the point-by-point response was, rather than just reading, hey, we invited him to come out to WrestleMania, blah, blah, blah. I would have liked, if they had point-by-point response to everything in his segment, I would have liked to have seen that.
That's a great point. WWE is really, really smart. Their PR guys are really smart at staying quiet. As much as you and I would have liked to have seen it, it might weaken their position.
Interesting. So, and I guess to continue on, how radical do you think this deal is for SmackDown on Fox, and does this make SmackDown the A show going forward?
It's interesting. A lot of fans have preferred SmackDown over Raw for a while. I don't really honestly see that much of a difference. I am aware of the differences. Of course, obviously the wrestlers are different. The time, cutoff time is different. I get it. I get that SmackDown's a little bit more of a fun show. Will it become the A show is a great question. I don't necessarily think so, because Raw is just so long running, and frankly, it's a better name, it's a better brand, it's a better color, it has better history, it generally has better wrestlers, although we're starting to see in the superstar shakeup that they're moving a lot of key names to SmackDown for Fox. What SmackDown has going for it is it'll be on broadcast, and broadcast, even Fox, is generally has better tune-in levels than USA Network or any cable channel. USA Network does very well on cable. But Friday night is still Friday night. It's not a great TV night. It's date night. It's going out night. It's whatever. So I don't think it's a B show anymore. I know that's how they used to kind of program it, and we used to look at it, and they even use the terminology kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way. But I don't believe it'll overtake Raw. If it stayed on Tuesdays, maybe, but it's basically just like replacing a Tim Allen sitcom on a Friday. So no, I still have them lined up as Raw being 1 and SmackDown being 2.
Now, there's also the perception that Fox could have an influence where the SmackDown product might be a little more sports than sports entertainment going forward. Do you think that's possible?
That's an interesting take, and I've never really given that much thought. I know they want as much spillover content as is humanly possible. They recently announced they're going to launch a studio show on FS1. But yeah, they certainly plan to treat it in terms of a broadcast as being more sportsy, and I'm guessing that will be reflected in the play-by-play and the presentation. It may look a little bit like Fox NFL Sunday, a little bit more than it looks like Raw. But I don't think Vince is giving up so much control that it won't still be completely his baby and completely his vision. And, nobody's got more of a stranglehold over this business in history than the McMahon family has. So I don't think he's going to let it stray too much into sports and away from storylines, because we see other wrestling shows that are much less storyline. And look, whether we like the storylines or we don't like the storylines, they really are a humongous part of the success story of WWE.
Now, the other thing I think that has been great about All Elite Wrestling, and this is another just opinion or view I've developed, I think it might be temporary, but it just seems like the guys actually have some leverage now, because now there's an option where wrestlers and talent might have another big organization they can go to that might have good TV exposure going forward in the coming months. We'll see. But I think that's a good thing, because that's just sort of been the issue after WCW went under, is that WWE was really the only game in town, and now, at least temporarily, that doesn't seem to be the case, and I think that's good for the men and women of this business.
Yeah, it's always good for the, I know they're not employees, but let's call them, for the employees to have more employers to go to. It's a real estate rule. It's a seller's market versus a buyer's market. And right now, WWE being the only game in town, you really do have to, kind of mind your P's and Q's and maybe not speak up too much. There are a handful of guys, Brock Lesnar, for example, that can kind of do whatever they want. And then there are other people that, they cross a line that might not even be so terrible. We'll never hear from them again. So it's always good when we have more stateside options for the talent to explore. That said, there are two things about AEW to me in its position in independent wrestling. Number one, we have it as being this great hope to compete against WWE. It is so unproven and so comparatively small that if we put too much pressure on it, if Cody and the guys put too much pressure on themselves, it may be gone before we know it. So a lot of people are, jumping, a lot of fans and writers are jumping to the conclusion that it can compete with WWE. I absolutely do not think it can compete with WWE. In a few years, maybe. But it's nowhere near that now. It's a pie-in-the-sky pipe dream. It's wonderful. It makes us all happy. And let's see how it goes. But number two, there have been other options. Obviously the Ring of Honors. And
I think it's a nostalgia thing, partly. Because...
nostalgia for who exactly?
I think for the Monday Night Wars, really.
Mm-hmm.
People are desperate to see that again, I think. Because in many ways, that was one of the hottest periods of the business. And I think people want to see that again.
I think so too, and I agree with you. I just think what I want to see isn't necessarily what we're going to see for a very long time, if ever. I also don't know that anyone will ever want to go head-to-head with WWE again. It's a completely different time.
I just want something, new and fresh on TV, basically. Mm-hmm. And I think AEW could be that, and I think to have new wrestling on a major network and to have guys like Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, to get to be on TV, a TV network that's very accessible every week, I think is fantastic. So I'm thinking about it from that more so than, man, I really want someone to stick it to Vince McMahon. So, right.
And I think a lot of fans are maybe a little bit more towards the middle on those two things. Right. But yeah, of course we want to see more wrestling content. I'm a little confused. I don't have a good answer to a question you didn't ask of why nobody else has been able to get a Turner-type deal and return it. I don't know why. I don't know why the Ring of Honors of the world in New Japan has a time zone issue. So at least that makes sense to me. I don't know why we haven't had a real, true competitor for a while. TV has been here for a long time. Cable TV has been here for a long time. Yes, live programming, I should say, is now way more valuable than it used to be. But I'm not sure why it's taken this long. So I wish the boys all the best. I would love to see a head-to-head real competition. I don't want to make it sound like I'm not into that. I just think you not only are putting, not you personally, the royal you wrestling fan could be putting the cart before the horse if they think that's going to happen in 2019 or in 2020. Right. I would be stunned.
Is Vince McMahon intimidated, or is this not even a blip on his radar, you think?
It's funny. I think most people would say it's not a blip on his radar. But maybe that might be a public pride persona and also posturing he has to do for shareholders. Frankly, the guy is so busy. The guy is so successful. The guy is so rich. I would imagine it's something like, hey, let's keep an eye on these guys because they're getting some of our talent. But beyond that, I don't think he's going to have to start doing things to bury them. I think right now the onus is on AEW. And what the Elite has done very well, kind of mocking WWE more so than Vince needs to pay attention to that.
Would it anger Vince McMahon if this TNT deal becomes official? Would that make him angry, you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think it would make him angry. I don't know about that because it's not like Turner is involved with WWE currently, right? So probably not angry. It won't be anywhere near the billions of dollars WWE is getting for TV. It won't even be, they'll be buying their TV time essentially in all likelihood. So
that's another aspect. So in this deal, would there be a revenue split or would it be AEW paying for its time essentially?
My understanding, based on the people I've spoken to, is it would be more AEW paying for its time and TNT than Turner paying AEW for its show. I do have, another very good wrestling reporter, and I had been talking about whether or not, whether that would be the case or whether it'd be a revenue share. And, we've both heard rumblings and have talked to people about, maybe a couple of months ago, it might have been a little bit of a different story. But the truth is, when you're talking with Turner, a very established, very well-off company inside of a gigantic parent company, I don't think it's not the UFC, it's not WWE, it's not MLB. They have MLB, they have NBA, they know what they have to pay for. And I think currently AEW has way more to prove than Turner has in terms of like trying to get them to come to their networks. I think AEW needs this deal more than Turner does, and I think Turner knows that.
I guess that is a concern for me, because I think that is what TNA was doing. I think when they were briefly on Fox Sports, I believe they were paying for that time. And, I don't want them. I mean, you have to build up a promotion, but I hope, it's not a situation of AEW being a money pit or whatever for a few years until it gets going. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a tricky standpoint, and that's why I've been cautious about AEW in general, not because I don't like the people involved, not because I don't think they have a cool merch, not because I don't want to see somebody rise up and challenge WWE, but because there is so much to do, so much to prove. I mean, the ECW couldn't get distribution, the WCW had its problems on Turner. AEW, as far as I know, they're having their second show next month, right? Like, they are so young. They're very talented wrestlers, but now it's big boy time. Now it's business time. And things get very different when you start talking about advertisers and airtime and, those sorts of negotiations and the business aspects of it. It's cool. You have guys who could write some content. Cool. You have guys who could do some moves, and cool. You have a nice t-shirt. But they know, they're not dumb. They know there's so much more to it than that. But right now, jumping at TV, even though they probably do need it to survive, is a risky move.
Okay, so I think that's about all the time we have for today. Tony, thank you so much. Just really quick, are there any final thoughts or is there anything you wanted to get across just before we wrap it up here?
No, Jeffrey, look, man, I'm a reporter. You ask great questions. So I can tell you this has been a great interview. It's been my pleasure, and I'd be happy to come back anytime.
All right, and is there anything you'd like to plug or where people can check you out online or social media or anything you'd like to share?
Oh, sure. I guess since I'm doing this on company time, let me plug therap.com. We're a Hollywood trade. And on Twitter, I am at Tony Maglio.
Tony, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate all your time today. Thanks for covering this topic, first of all, because I think it's just very exciting to see it on the wrap of all things. And I'm going to be looking at this situation very closely and where things go from here for All Elite Wrestling. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The pleasure's mine.
Thank you, and have a great day, sir. Bye-bye.
You too.